Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now I'm in Nevada, and that's Lake Mead behind me. Lake Mead is the largest man made reservoir in the United States, but before it was created in 1938, this area was home to a number of settlements, some modern and some ancient. Today we're going to take a look at a couple of those settlements, including one that, as the lake has receded, has reemerged from the water. We are starting out today on the southern side of Lake Mead, but we need to travel to the northern edge, near the town of Overton. Taking a look at the lake here, you can see how low it currently is. 40 years ago, most of the land in front of me would have been underwater. Lake Mead was created when the Hoover Dam was built on the Colorado River in 1935. The low water levels here have been in the news for years. The lake's levels have gone up a little bit since its low point in 2022, but as I'm filming this, it's about 16 feet higher now than it was a couple years ago, but this is still the second lowest it's been over the last 5 years. So not as bad as it was, but still bad. As we are filming, the water level is at 1,061 feet, and full is 1,229 feet. It was last near full in 1983, and since then it has dropped to 164 feet. Before the lake was created in 1935, this wasn't just an empty valley. People had lived here for thousands of years. Once the lake was created, though, what was once people's homes were now the bottom of the lake. With the lake shrinking, it gives us a chance to visit some of those towns again. First, we have to get to the other side of the lake, though. But I have to say, the drive so far has been incredible. We're taking Highway 167 or North Shore Road, and the scenery has been amazing. If you're into this kind of amazing desert scenery, this is the drive for you. The first place we're going to check out today is the Lost City Museum in Overton. The Lost City refers to Pueblo Grande de Nevada, which was a series of ancient Native American villages in the area, and once the Hoover Dam was built, it was submerged under the lake. Knowing that the site was going to be submerged, in 1935, the National Park Service built a museum with a recreation of some of the ruins. Alright, we've made it to the museum. Let's check it out and see what we can find out about the Lost City. Archaeologists had found evidence of people inhabiting this area going back to around 8000 BC, but Pueblo Grande de Nevada was founded around AD 300 by people that are referred to as the basket makers. Eventually the ancestral Puebloans, which used to be called the Anasazi, moved in as well, and the two groups merged, though it's not known if that merger was peaceful or through war between the two groups. The so-called Lost City was abandoned around 1150, then rediscovered in 1924, and then lost again in the mid-1930s. This museum has a number of artifacts from the Lost City site, but just imagine what's now under the lake. The site was studied using technology of 100 years ago, but with modern techniques, we could probably learn so much more about it. Now we're going to check out the recreations of the Lost City, but it looks like there's an example of a pit house over here. Before the Puebloans came, the basket makers had constructed their homes underground in the pit house form. And according to this sign, this one's actually reconstructed on an actual site. And can we actually go inside? It says no more than 3 adults at a time. It looks like it has bars across the top. When the ancestral Puebloans arrived, they introduced adobe above-ground structures, but pit houses continue to be in use as well. And let's take a look inside. I don't think we could see anything down there. Here are the recreations of the Lost City ruins. Now, at the actual site, some of the buildings had up to 100 rooms. So this is just a small recreation. And these doors are pretty small. I don't know if I want to climb in there. That's what it looks like inside. When the Lost City was rediscovered in the 1920s, it became a big tourist attraction for the area. It brought in a lot of people. And when the Hoover Dam was planned, they knew that the site would be submerged. So this museum was built to keep the story of the Lost City alive. Alright, let's see if we can get inside this one. Man, this thing is small. Okay, so here's what the inside looks like. We have a hole at the top for smoke to escape. And the tiny door. Now that we've checked out this recreation of the Lost City, we're going to head back towards Lake Mead, and we're going to visit St. Thomas, a lost city that's reemerged. The town site we're heading to right now of St. Thomas was once under 70 feet of water, but it's been out of the water since 2002. We have to hike down to the site, but you could tell the National Park Service doesn't believe the town will be underwater again anytime soon, since they spent the money to put up signs. It's kind of crazy to think that had we come here 40 years ago, this would have all been underwater. But somewhere in front of us is where the town of St. Thomas once was. As we're walking out to the town site, we're walking on what was basically the bottom of Lake Mead at one point. The town of St. Thomas was founded near the Muddy River in 1865 by Mormon pioneers. Nevada had become a state in 1864, but this region of Nevada was part of Arizona until 1867. When lines are drawn on a map to set state borders, it isn't always easy to tell where those same lines are on the ground, and because of that, it wasn't realized that St. Thomas was in Nevada until 1870. Not realizing that St. Thomas wasn't in the state anymore, it was actually made the county seat for Arizona's Pah-Ute County after it was no longer part of Arizona. Kind of an interesting side note, the town that was the county seat before St. Thomas, Colville, was also submerged under Lake Mead when the Hoover Dam was built. After the border was surveyed and shifted, Arizona dissolved Pah-Ute County, with the land that was still in Arizona becoming part of Mojave County. That was probably for the best, since every town that was ever made the county seat ended up under a lake. St. Thomas shifting into Nevada was kind of the first disaster that hit the town, because once Nevada realized the town had actually been part of the state, it wanted all the back taxes. So rather than pay 4 years' worth of taxes, most of the citizens just left. After the Mormons left, others seeing an opportunity with a town already here moved in. Then eventually the Mormons returned too, and the town had a bit of a boom in the 1880s. We're coming up to a sign here, which I guess is more evidence the National Park Service doesn't think the water is coming back anytime soon. Looks like this sign talks about farming. Farming and salt mining were the primary industries of the town. In case we needed any more evidence that we are at what was once the bottom of a lake, there are shells everywhere. There used to be a tree here, you can still see the stump. I imagine this tree was probably in the yard of this building right here. We've now reached the remains of the town, but I'm not exactly sure what this building was. There's no sign for it, and it's not on the map that I have either. In 1912, a railroad spur from the San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake line reached the town, and I've seen a picture of the train coming into town, and you can see these same mountains in the background. So the tracks must have been right around here somewhere. Here's St. Thomas's once tree-lined main street. You could still see a lot of the tree stumps. The Arrowhead Highway, which was the first all-weather automobile highway that connected Los Angeles and Salt Lake City, was created in the 1910s and went through St. Thomas, bringing new business to town. By the time the numbered highway system came around in 1926, the government knew St. Thomas's days were numbered and shifted Highway 91, which replaced the Arrowhead Highway, far to the north. Here are the remains of a house. I believe this is the basement down here. I don't think the house is completely buried under the sand. Let's take a little bit of a closer look. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, this has to be the basement down here. So the house would have been built on top of this. I'm not sure who this house belonged to, but if I had to guess, I'd say the last residents of the house were probably fishes. I love when they have historic photos at a site. So here's the house in its heyday. And here's what it looks like today. You can see more of the tree stumps as we walk down the main street. But this over here was the Frenner home, which is a lot bigger than the last home that we took a look at. Here are the stairs leading up to their door. The town had a population of about 500 at its height. There are the remains of a fence here, and I'm not sure if this is original to when the town first went underwater, but you could tell taking a look at these that they've been at least partially submerged at one point. Here's a cistern. Pretty much every building has one of these. Even though they were pretty close to the muddy river, water still would have been an issue. It gets hot here. See if we can see the bottom. And nope, can't see the bottom. With the train coming into town and the highway coming through, the town had its ups and downs. It looks like there's some sort of engine here. In the early 1920s, survey crews for the proposed dam that would eventually become the Hoover Dam used St. Thomas as a base of operations, which should have been a warning sign that their days were numbered. But the death sentence came on December 21st, 1928, when President Calvin Coolidge signed the Boulder Canyon Project Act, which authorized the long-rumored dam on the Colorado River that would place this whole area under a reservoir. And I believe this is what remains of the bunker home. And here's their cistern over here. And I'm glad these things are gated up, because some of them are very hard to see, and I would hate to fall into one of these. This one's fine, but some have brush all around them. Can we see the bottom? Nope. Here's the front door to what was somebody's house. And all around their house now are shells. Here's another tree stump. I wonder if these were cut down in advance to protect boats or if they just naturally fell over. This one looks like it was cut. When they decided to build the dam, they had to do something about the people living here. So the government sent two appraisers to determine the value of the land in order to compensate the residents. The town elected one of their own to help determine the value too. Of course, the two people the government sent had a lower number than the resident of St. Thomas, and the government's number was the one they used. People were not happy about the values that were assessed, and there were fights over the land well into the 1940s, long after the land was underwater. For some who may have lived here 40 or 50 years, I'm sure no amount of money would have been enough, but in the end, none of them ended up being happy with the amounts they were given. You're at a pretty big disadvantage when you're negotiating, when a lake's coming whether you want it to or not. And we can't see the bottom of this one either. I'd shine the light from my phone down there, but I'm afraid of dropping it. This is what remains of the Hanning store and ice cream parlor. And this was the first building to reemerge from the water as the lake receded. It's pretty neat that there was an ice cream store out here. I bet they did great business during the summer. Once the train came in, the town was able to get ice, and then of course in the later years there was electricity. I'm taking a bit of a wide walk around the building. Even though these were submerged 70 feet underwater, they're still pretty delicate, and I want to make sure not to do any more damage to them so that future people can enjoy looking at them as well. The Hoover Dam was mostly completed in 1935, but it took a few years for Lake Mead to grow big enough for the waters to reach here. And some residents didn't believe the waters would ever reach the town. This is the town blacksmith, and you kind of have to be careful walking around out here. You don't know what's just under the ground. I mean, look at the spike on the top of this concrete. You'd hate to step on that. I had mentioned that some people didn't believe that the water would ever reach the town. One of the last residents of St. Thomas was a man named Hugh Lord. He was one of those people who didn't think the water would get here. But in June 1938, he went on a fishing trip, and when he headed back to his car, at first he couldn't find it. Then after looking around for a few minutes, he realized his car was in the water. A few days later, on June 11th, 1938, he woke up with water all around his bed. So he did the only sensible thing. He lit his house on fire and left town in a rowboat. We're coming up to the schoolhouse. When the water finally got here, it definitely made up for lost time. Hugh Lord woke up with the water around his bed on June 11th. Well, on June 12th, the town was completely submerged. I'll throw up a picture on the screen. This school looked pretty impressive in its time. It was a big, 2-story schoolhouse. Here are the front steps. Think of how many kids went up these steps on their way to school every day. Because St. Thomas is so far from the dam, on the edges of where the reservoir would reach, it has reemerged a few times over the years. The first time it reappeared was in 1945, just 7 years after it disappeared. Every time the town reemerged from the water, they would hold reunions here where the townspeople would come back. But the last one was in 2012, and I don't believe that anyone is still alive today that ever lived here. I know I made a similar joke earlier, but I'm a dad and I'm going to use my dad joke privilege and say that the last students here were a school of fish. We can't see it from here, but off in this direction is the muddy river. I think we may have found the town dump. There's glass and pottery everywhere here. Here's another foundation. At points, this town was 70 feet underwater, but since the 1990s, the water levels at Lake Mead have been dropping, and the town came out from under the water in 2002 and hasn't been underwater since. Providing one of the other dams on the Colorado River doesn't fail, my guess is this will never be underwater again. There were several stores in the town, including the Gentry store where the post office was located. And here's the Gentry store now. It must have been something for the residents to come back and see the town again after it reemerged from the water. Being a small town, they probably knew every inch of the town, and seeing what had happened to it had to have been heartbreaking. Before the water reached here, they did move the town cemetery to nearby Overton. So if there are any bodies found in the area now, they were probably put there by the mafia. And I'm kind of half joking. As the waters receded, they actually have found several bodies under the lake. It looks like there may have been some sort of water storage here. And we can actually see the bottom of this one. It's pretty shallow. And this would have been the Gentry Hotel right here. With St. Thomas having been on the early Arrowhead Highway, I imagine numerous early auto travelers stayed here for the night. I would mention that the last guest to stay at the hotel was probably a fish, but I think my wife will throw a brick at me if I do. There's something over here, and it looks like the gutter is kind of sloping away from this one, so this may have been where maybe a bath was at. And based on the amount of bottles and other things people have found over here, my guess is the outhouses were right here. So here's what the hotel once looked like. As you can see, it was a pretty impressive building. And here's what it looks like today. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that the bottles were probably a sign that that's where the outhouse was. The reason for that is back in the outhouse days, people would often just drop their bottles and trash into the outhouse while they were using the restroom. And so a lot of times where an outhouse was, you find a lot of trash. So those sites are also gold mines for people looking for antique bottles and stuff. We should be heading towards the Cyphus house right now. Cyphus was the man that was nominated by the townspeople to help come up with the valuation of the land. The same valuation that was later disregarded by the government completely, going with their own valuation. With everything having been underwater, most of the sites here are just foundations now, and you get to the point where you've seen one foundation, you've seen them all, but it's still pretty interesting to walk around and just try to imagine what this place would have been like when it was a town, or even in 1938 as the waters are coming in and people are fleeing on boats. One thing's for certain. When they built this town in the middle of the desert in 1865, they probably never expected it to be underwater one day. And that's our look at the lost city and the re-emerged town of St. Thomas. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.